Hello, my name is Pedestrian Tactics. A big thanks to Il Gates and the Producer Dojo for hosting this little video. Today I wanted to show you how I made a track I like to call Redef. Here it is. Forgive me of my organization of this. I think most of the projects that I actually finish are the ones that I knock out before I have time to organize them. If the project's been really organized well, then there's usually something wrong with the song. Most of this track is set up the way you would probably set up any track. I've got drums up here, some various melodies. Most of my elements are routed through a sidechain send effect, which effectively ducks everything below the kick and the snare. So if I were to isolate that, you'd get definition of. And that just helps the drums punch through. I did this in Ableton 9 before they had the whole infinite grouping scenario that they have now. So in my newer projects, I found it useful to not use a send effect for the sidechain and instead just group all of the tracks that I want sidechain together and then put the sidechain compressor in the group. I just find that easier to visualize. I kind of think of it like Photoshop layers. So I really wanted to cover two elements that I think were most unique to this track. They were the two main basses. So the first one is right at the drop. Definition of. So this sort of harmonic, noisy bass. And then the second bass I wanted to cover was right after this break section. This second iteration comes out. So both of these rely on the same principle that I've used for a few tracks, which is forcing a few sounds through an effect chain and making one of those sounds louder than the others and then distorting the whole thing so that the loudest sound kind of dominates the others and causes them all to kind of clip under it. So this is the first bass. So this is made up of two instances of Serum. One is just providing a clean, solid bass note. And if you're not wearing headphones, you won't hear this at all. And then the second one is providing the mid and high end. So Serum has a separate section for a sub bus, but I ended up using that in this first one and making it super muddy sounding. So that's why I've copied it and created another instance to create sort of a clean bass signal. So what's happening here is there's a harmonic series, and this is actually just the default harmonic series that Steve Duda loaded into Serum. It's just a series of sine waves, all multiples of each other. And I'm just sweeping between those. So you'll be able to hear what is happening if I just turn off the saturator here. So here's what's going on. So there's this noise. I'm just using that to add some texture. But otherwise it's just sliding through those notes. And the actual MIDI track for the bass is just a solid note here. I do a little pitch shifting right at the end of it. And the rest is just automation of that wavetable. And then I've got this sub bass, which you can't hear right now. And the reason for that is because I've piled on just a few effects, which are not really important. They're just all subtle stereo splitting sort of things. The meat and potatoes is back here. One of those effects, I think it's actually this one, is cutting the bass out. So that's why you're not hearing that sub bass. But trust me, it's there. When I run this harmonic series and a sub bass through a saturator, it ends up sounding a little bit like this. You can hear that. You can hear that harmonic series gets sort of clipped by the low note. So I'm just taking advantage of that, and then by adding a little bit of noise, it gets a little bit dirtier. So by doing that, the bass note itself gets pretty muddy and dirty, so that's why I've added that second Serum chain, just to add a clean note of bass with it. Here's the automation of it. Okay, so for the second bass, I'm basically taking the same principle of running those notes through the saturator. The first part of it is the first bass, right there. And then the main components of this are just this high note, which I don't feel like I need to explain too much. It's just a saw wave with a few fancy effects on top of it, just a high note there. And then this much more ugly sounding low note, which sounds pretty awful on its own. But when you run the two together through this is where all the magic happens. The difference between this and the last bass is instead of driving the saturator by the same amount, I'm automating it so that every time that note and also the kick hits, the drive goes up a ton. And when you turn the drive up, the volume also goes up. So to compensate, I actually had to turn the output volume down at the same time. The way that I found making this easy was just to link them both up to a macro here, so that when I turn the macro up, you can see the drive goes up and the output goes down by an equivalent amount. In the automation lane, you can see what's going on. And also there's this EQ8 on the left and right. So the reason for that is just to boost the low end where I want it to cut through in the saturator. I'm just boosting that up so it's super obvious when it hits the saturator. And then I don't want it to be too bassy, so then I just drop it down by the same amount after it comes out of the saturator. The last thing I just want to touch on is the concept of resampling. Towards the end of the track, I ended up reusing the first melody. But I just wanted to switch it up a little bit. So instead of modifying the melody itself, I just mixed it down into an audio channel, which you can see right here. I just took that and sort of reshaped it with the warp markers. And that's a really fun technique just to get some new sounds out of something you've already developed. So for instance, this was originally really quick, right? Just a really quick sound. But if you stretch it way out, and then you switch your stretching algorithm to texture and turn the flux all the way down, it's going to repeat at a specific interval in order to make it longer. And you can change that repeat by changing the grain size. So if I pull it way up here, I can get some cool sounds out of that. Or if I fiddle with it long enough, I can get that repeat value to match a note that I want. So that's actually pretty close to the key of the song, like 17. Yeah. So you can get some cool sounds out of that. I hope your enjoyment of this video was somewhat equivalent to the pools of sweat now embedded in my desk after making the song. So thanks for watching, and until next release, take care, I guess.